We all made it through 10 weeks of entertainment finance from first dollar to distribution of revenues. You guys did amazing. I just wanted to take a moment and congratulate all of you because this is not an easy subject matter, and every one of you had some really good questions, and you are all very attentive, very detail oriented, and I truly appreciate this kind of group and feel very honored to be able to teach you. So I'm going to guide you through this somewhat, I should say it's a little longer presentation because it's really summing up in essence the entire 10 weeks we worked on. So get ready. This class really is about all you need to know in relation to financing and producing commercially viable features and television content. Once you made it through this class, you really do have all the essentials you need to put your own project together. In this course, we talked about a few different things, a few different modules. We started with the introduction, the history of Hollywood and the changing landscape. We talked about distribution and sales. We talked about what it entails to get your project on screen. We talked about the various parts of project financing, from creating a solid finance plan to optimizing profits by reducing risk, to optimizing your project in relation to the market, and to realizing commercially viable projects by using financial elements which are non-recoupable, such as free money. We talked about essential agreements and terms, with the goal being profitability and transparency. We talked about how to establish a project business expose so you'll be able to go out there and pitch your own project to the world. And we are summarizing all this in relation to the main aspects of the absolute bottom line of what you need to know in order to go out and do well. So when Hollywood started and was in its best age, its best time, which is referred to as the golden age of Hollywood, we were really looking at 5 big major studios that were very active in the time, and what they did is basically produce and distribute their motion pictures. They contracted talent such as cast and directors and contracted them basically as employees for these studios. So one actor could not be working for Warner Brothers if he was contracted by Paramount, for example. The change that the Supreme Court applied in 1948 related to the fact that the studios could now no longer own their own theaters. They were unable to release the films and had to think about changing business models. It was also supported by the fact that in 1950s the television came about and people were really changing their viewing behavior and not going out so much to watch movies in the theaters, but really staying at home and watching them on television. So the studios started to produce television products. And during recent years, we have seen a lot of changes, not only because our studios have changed from being the big 5 to the big 6, but we're also seeing new players coming into town, such as the streaming services. We're seeing television networks creating streaming services, and we're seeing, again, audience behavior, watching behavior really is what I wanted to say, changing, which is also changing the content demand and the distribution platforms. What we're talking about right now is the golden age of television, and that's pretty much what we are visiting as we speak. When we look at the main differences between the major studio system and the independent system, it really comes down to just a few things. And the main thing being that when a major studio develops and produces and releases a project, it will own and control all the rights. It will own the entire IP, and the IP will not be shared with anyone. And if the independent producer would go to a major studio to get his or her project done, they would have to give up the IP and it would be controlled by the studio. The independent producer, on the other hand, when he or she realizes a project, will control the IP from the beginning to end. And what the independent producer will sell in order to generate revenues is the distribution rights in relation to this IP, but not the copyright. When we look at the major differences between the major studio finance system and the independent finance system, the obvious one is obviously that the studios make movies that are much more expensive than the independents are, and that has to do with the fact that their rights, overhead, the development, the production fees, the location fees, talent fees, marketing fees, distribution fees, legal fees, etc., are much higher for a major studio film than they are for an independent film. Independents have to be and are forced to be more frugal and are a little more conscious about especially development costs, because they have to pay for them up front, not knowing if the film or television project is actually going to get made. So the development costs are likely to be much lower. Independents will also try to negotiate great deals with cast and crew as well as talent, meaning the director, and they will be much more strictly monitoring the entire process of the production itself. The main difference between the two is also that Hollywood studios will handle their accounting in-house, and an independent production, if they are professional, will use a collection agent, which is a third party, and therefore the accounting itself is much more transparent with the independents. Let's take a look at distribution and sales. The studios are entities who will release their films in theaters and therefore have an agreement with the theater owner, which would be the exhibitor. The agreement usually specifies the box office split, meaning how much money per box office ticket goes to the distributor and how much money would go to the exhibitor. The studio will also spend a lot of money on P&A, which is to create the awareness for the movie, and P&A can in some cases even be higher than the actual budget of a movie. P&A is going to be recouped from box office revenues, and we're talking about the share that is received by the distributor, not the share that is received by the exhibitor. The independent producer has the right to, or the option to sell their film to the studio, who would then do exactly what I just described, release the film in the theaters and pay for the P&A. The producer would also have the option to not release the film theatrically and have it go straight to a streaming service or on VOD or on television, or they have the option to release it themselves through mechanisms like renting a studio, where they will tell the studio, here's my movie, you distribute it, I pay for the P&A, and I will tell you exactly how much money is going to be paid for what with the P&A. So they pay the studio a distribution fee, and the studio will then be the distribution service provider, and the film would basically look like it would be distributed by the studio with the logo and everything, but it is basically an independent movie which is released through a P&A financier who handles the P&A costs that the studios are going to use to create the campaigns, just as well as they would with their own films. Another version is renting a theater, which is called forewalling. In that case, the producer would basically rent a theater or more, could be many, would do a deal with the exhibitor similar to what the studio would do with the exhibitor, and would agree either on a flat payment or would agree on a box office split, where they give the exhibitor a certain amount of the box office and then they keep the producer would keep the other side of the box office. Here too, a P&A financier is needed in order to do a P&A campaign to raise awareness of the movie being released. So there are various options for the producer to go about distributing the film in the US. As it relates to foreign rights, meaning all the rights that are not domestic rights, U.S. domestic rights. Here, the studio would actually go ahead and distribute the film themselves in foreign countries in most cases. The independent producer would go ahead and hire a sales agent who would then, on the behalf of the producer, sell all the international rights to distributors in the local countries, who would then do what our distributor would do here in the US, meaning they would take the movie, put it in theaters, put it on television, put it on streaming service, put it on DVD, VOD, etc. When you look at television financing, it's a little different, but yet in some cases a little similar even. Let's look at how television earns its revenues. The television market today is defined by broadcast, cable networks, premium channels, OTT platforms, and streaming services and smart TVs. Most revenues derive from advertising and subscriptions, and content is provided through either in-house developed projects or deals that the network stations will do with producers. The platform increasing component that we are experiencing right now, so many streaming services are being launched, so many network stations are expanding. This is a situation where the demand is definitely increased for content. Parallel to that, we have decreasing television ratings because people are watching television online or go to other places, which in turn creates a loss of advertising revenues. So the producers have a few options. If they would go today and pitch a show to a television network to say, here's my show, it's fantastic, why don't you pay for it? The network station would likely say, I don't know, because it's expensive. Reason being that their revenues have a little bit suffered because of the decrease of advertising revenues, and they don't really have the money to do their own productions right now. That said, in some cases, then there are obviously some network stations like HBO and the larger ones who make it a point to spend much more money in content to be able to compete with the streaming services. And there is a higher amount available for certain programming. Now the producer has the option to go to the network stations and say, I have this fantastic idea, why don't you produce it with me, and you can pay the production, etc. If the producer would do that, the network station would own all the rights, would own the entire IP, would own all the revenues. It's a little similar that when the producer would go to the studio and pitch a movie there, they would also own the IP because they pay for it and they release it. The producer has also the option to go to a television network and say, I have this amazing idea for a TV show, here's my Bible, and I also have half the money because I'm shooting this TV show in a subsidized region, like for example Europe. So I don't really need you to pay for the full budget. I only need you to pay for half the budget. In that case, a co-production deal can be structured, which is also potentially a split rights deal in which the network station would hold domestic rights and the producer can hold international rights, for example. And the last version of things where the producer can get his or her content on screen is to negotiate a buy-on deal with a network. In that case, the producer really becomes the mini network because he controls this time on the network. The television network has no control over the time, and the producer can kind of produce I wouldn't say whatever they want, but they would have to produce something that where they control the IP, where they control the content, and they also control the commercial space in between of their content. This option is mainly available for track record strong producers, where the network would know when we sell this producer the time, whatever he will produce will look like a commissioned show, will look really well, and it's not going to make us look stupid. So these shows are then produced by the producer and also financed by the producer, and very often are supported by branding and sponsorship. When we look at our first basic finance plan, and you guys are so smart right now, this is going to be boring for you, but let's just look at the main financing sources that we have available when we put together an independent finance plan for either an independent movie or a documentary or a television project. We are going to need equity financing. We're going to likely have some bank financing, which is either gap financing or pre-sale financing. In most cases, it's a combination. We might have a mezzanine lender who will offer some mezzanine financing. Distribution elements are in most cases pre-sale financing. We have incentives, which could be US tax credits or international grants. We have in-kind services, which could be anything from music investments to crowdsourcing to post-production services, any service that is a budgeted line item that we will not have to pay for because it's given to us in kind. And then we have branding and integration financing components available to us. So if we don't go to the network and say, here's our project, and you go finance it and then you own it, we will likely be faced with having to put all these little elements together, and then we want to go about this in a way that's ideally a little bit smart. So as we have learned, the bank will usually give us some bank gap, which is the loan that they give us in an unsecured fashion based on our rights that we have not sold yet, and that will be capped at 20% of the budget. You will never get more than that. It's always maximum 20% of the budget, no matter how many unsold rights you have available. The production incentives are usually, depending on where you shoot, anywhere from 15 to 40, sometimes even 50%. Mezzanine financing is in the level of 5 to 10%, and the equity, the pre-sales we should be establishing in order for us to verify our market demand should be somewhere around the 35% bracket, ideally not less. The equity should ideally not be more than 35% in order to be profitable and risk averse, and our sales estimates should ideally reflect 75% in the foreign territories, and that is 75% of our budget. So when we pre-sale 35% of the 75%, we're not pre-selling 35% of 75%, we're pre-selling 35% of 100% of the budget, which will leave us with 50% in unsold territories. A good idea is only as good as its execution. We all, stumble over one or the other fantastic idea, and then we have to figure out how do we develop this thing in order to be something meaningful on the big screen or the small screen. It is important to choose a story that has the potential to be commercial, and it is one where we can create a budget that is feasible, especially in relation to the marketplace where the project is supposed to be released. We are always looking at attaching commercially viable talent, and we will obviously make sure that whatever talent we package stays in combination in a good, balance with our budget. When we're thinking about the needle in the haystack kind of story, we're thinking about a mainstream story. Mainstream doesn't mean that it has to be mainstream as in the genre. It could also be an art house movie that we are developing, and could be something that's a nomination for an Academy Award. So that's also mainstream because it's commercial. Anything that makes money I would consider commercial. So that's the kind of story we're focusing on. We're focusing on stories that can actually make it on screen, that can actually be profitable, and they can be any genre as long as they are commercial and profitable. We're thinking about stories that have a high concept story structure, which means they're not plain, straightforward, predictable stories that when we start watching them, we already know the ending. We want surprising twists and turns. We want inspiring and satisfying character arcs. We want authentic stories and authentic characters, and we want fresh ideas, untold stories, and we want to see them told in an innovative visual style. And we want to develop our story always with the target audience in mind. There are many ways to skin a cat. There's many ways to tell a story. And it really comes down to what you, as a producer, feel is the best approach with the writer that you're working with. In the ideal world, you want to create a story that has a structure that adheres to the storytelling style we feel is enticing in this culture. And when you look at that kind of storytelling style, you will in its most simplest way, discover that the story will have 3 acts. So when Sid Field talks about his foundation of screenplay writing, he does a really good job in explaining and breaking down how these three acts should be structured in order to create a certain dramatic component. What I always what you always do when you put your script together and when you work with your writer, you think about, what scenes and what stories can I put together that are surprising? How can I create a world that is relatable yet new and interesting? Ask yourself, would you actually spend $20 to go see this movie in the theaters? And be really honest about it. And ask yourself who the story is for, who you're telling the story, and what your target audience is. Think about these things very early on, because they will determine your financing structure for your project. Any idea you work on, you would want to make sure that you have the rights. You could option the underlying rights for an idea that you are going to develop into a script. Maybe you found a book that you think is interesting, you want to make into a movie. Maybe you saw a short film you want to make into a movie or a TV series. Maybe you saw an article in a newspaper that you feel would be a great basic story for a project. Whatever it is, you need to make sure that you are optioning or buying the rights for this underlying material. If you're buying rights for an underlying material and then you find a writer to write it for you, you would do a deal with the writer that's a for-hire deal where the writer does not own any rights. You just pay him for the services of writing. If a writer comes to you with an original script, that's a different story, because now, quiet over there, sorry, my dog is barking. Now you're going to do a deal with the writer, the screenplay writer, who would then first get an option fee and then later a purchase agreement for the script that you are purchasing in order to make it into a movie. All this is part of a development cost component, where you are buying securing options, you're buying rights of underlying materials, you're paying the writers to write the story for you, and you're also starting to package your project with talent, director, etc., etc. This is part of your development period. The way we're looking at our budget here in this course is we are comparing it to the value that the project would have in the marketplace. So we're looking at a project, and while we are putting together the above the line, below the line, post-production costs, admin, insurance, contingency, bond fees, etc., we are also keeping in mind that our sales estimates are indicating what the project is worth, and that means that 75% of our budget would be covered, would have to be reflected in sales estimates. So if the sales estimates are too low, we would have to think about lowering our budget, or we have to think about replacing some elements like cast or director or some such, in then increasing the value of the project and therefore adapting it so that the 75% sales estimates relation to the budget can make sense. Let's take a look at a few industry standard fees. As I mentioned, it would be great if you could put together a project that is budgeted at a range where your international sales estimates reflect 75% of it, or about that. Could be 70, could be 80, something like that. The costs that are related to your rights should be anywhere, usually between 1 and 4%. Producers and overhead fees should and could be anywhere between 3 and 12%. Legal and finance fees are about 1 to 10%, depending on the project, of course. And by the way, all these fees are dependent on the project and depending on the negotiations that you're entering into. I'm just giving you some basic ranges, and they really vary from project to project. Your completion bond fee, which is the insurance fee the completion bond is going to charge you, can be anywhere from 1.5% to 3%. The marketing publicity that you are budgeting in your movie has nothing to do with the P&A. It could be anywhere from 1 to 3%. Post-production depends really on music, licensing, visual effects, and special effects, and so many things, but could be anywhere from 10 to 30%. Above the line really depends on your cast level and your director. Could be anywhere from 20 to 50%. The below the line could be anywhere from 30 to 50%, again depending on if it's a union production, depending on where you're shooting it, depending on who the director is, because some directors have a tendency to be a little more expensive when it comes to productions, etc. Your contingency, which is something that the completion bond is going to require from you to have a bit of a safety cushion, could be anywhere from 5 to 10%, and that's really something that you would discuss with the completion bond company to see what they're comfortable with. Let's talk a little bit about packaging. Packaging means you're attaching a director and you're attaching your lead cast. This package is going to define the value of your project in the marketplace. So needless to say, if you do a movie with Brad Pitt, you know, it's valued at a certain amount of money. If you do the same movie with Joe Schmo, it's probably not going to be the same. So your cast really dictates what the value of your project in the market is going to be, what your sales estimates is going to be, and what your domestic revenue potential is going to be. So that said, not every film has to have a strong cast. For example, a horror movie or elevated genre movies, they are actually driven by the story. They're not necessarily driven by the cast element. So you have exceptions to that rule. But for the purpose of this little exercise, I just want to go through, you know, how the packaging process works. In the ideal world, you would package your director first. You will discuss your vision with the director. He will discuss his vision with you. And in the ideal world, those two visions match up well. Or maybe the director has a vision that even elevates your vision. And all of this is fine. What is not going to be fine if the director's vision does not match with yours, because that's a recipe for disaster. With the director together, you're going to decide, you know, what cast are we looking at? Who should we, you know, go to cast our main roles? And in some cases, the director has relationships because he might have worked with one or the other actor before. This is something you should use. You know, if they have these relationships, don't be shy about it. Ask for the director to approach the cast. Or you would talk to agents yourself by making pay-or-play offers. Those pay-or-play offers would have to be backed by an investor. So the conversation with an investor would have to happen before that. The idea here is that you would put together your package in combination with your investor and the agents, and put together a round little neat package that will allow you to go do your pre-sales. In order for you to be able to do pre-sales, you have to have at least one leading cast member firmly attached, as well as the director. And in order to do that, the agency is likely going to ask you to put down a down payment in relation to or in advance of the salary that you're going to be paying to the actor once you're shooting. This kind of money obviously would have to be covered either by you or by your equity investor. During the part 1 of our project financing chapter, we're going to talk about what an investor would need to see from you in order to show some interest in your project. We're talking about projects and their feasibility potential. We're talking about independent financing and what the elements contain. We obviously are talking about finance plans, including gap, mezzanine, equity, distribution financing, international production incentives and US incentives, crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, in-kind services, and other finance elements. In order to understand feasibility, we'll have to answer some questions. We have to think about what are the elements that would constitute a commercially viable project. How are sales estimates actually being established? That's a conversation you're going to have with your sales agent. You're going to talk about pre-sales, and as we know, they are important to verify the market demand. We're going to look at elements that help establish a finance plan. We had an example where we had a movie funded 100% equity, and we had the same movie funded with much less equity, and we figured out same movie, same revenues, same expenses, yet the movie with 100% equity showed a loss, the movie with less equity showed a revenue. We are talking about finding the right sales agents, what to look for. We're talking about some of the main deal points you're going to enter into the agreement with the sales agent, and you're going to look at some of the pitfalls of distribution that might hinder you from optimizing your project. A commercially viable project is a project that is able to show sales estimates for foreign territories of a minimum of 75% and is able to pre-sale 35% of the budget to those foreign territories. That's a project that would likely show profits if you would do this. How the sales estimates are established is in a way that the sales agent puts together a sheet that shows an ask and take scenario, and within that you'll see every little country that you could sell the distribution rights to and a percentage related to that, which means this is what the country could usually pay for or is right now in this moment paying for in relation to this kind of film. These numbers change depending on the status of the economy. It did change depending on the cast that you have attached, and maybe the value changing for the cast. So it's not all written in stone, but sales agents really know how to, sales agents really know how to look at their sales estimates and adapt them to the current marketplace. Pre-sales are important because it kind of signals the demand of the marketplace. So you have to imagine, if you put a movie together or a television series and you're not even able to sell 30% of your budget on this project, the likelihood of you selling it when it's done is not going to be much better. So it's very risky to do something where you are not able to establish any sales estimates, because you're basically not verifying that anyone actually wants your movie or your television series and wants to buy it. The finance plan we are discussing has various elements, and the most important element it's going to have are non-recoupable finance elements, which are funding sources you do not have to pay back, and we will talk about what those are. You obviously know what those are, we will revisit them. And pitfalls of distribution have to do with the fact that, you know, your sales agent could be charging a high fee, your sales agent could be charging a high distribution expense, your sales agent could not agree to a performance clause, your sales agent could not agree to a collection agent. All of these things are red flags. Not every movie is a big budget mainstream movie. There are beautiful stories and supported by just really fitting, amazing talent, which may not be your super A-level cast. This is all fine as long as the target audience you are releasing this film for keeps that in mind. So if you do a movie that has an art house character and has cast that may not be that known and the budget is very limited, you're looking at a film festival scenario, exploitation for the exploitation. It's a different scenario than going and, you know, putting a mainstream movie together and you're going the pre-sale route, etc., etc. Doing a movie that is a small budget movie for the art house circle is a little riskier than doing, you know, a small movie in a commercial fashion, because there you have elements that will allow you to verify the demand. You just have to gain an understanding that will lead you to believe that there is a market for your project and that there is a certain number associated to that. The Hollywood Reporter at some point put together a international sales estimate sheet. It shows us what kind of countries would pay what kind of license fees for films in what kind of budget range. So the films are as low as $750,000 and as high as $12 million in budget. And you see here all the different countries and what they would pay. This is just a basic guidance. It's not something that is written in stone, and it really depends on the project, and it really depends on the situation and the economy out there. But it is just a basic kind of help in guiding you in the direction of where you should be ending up with your project. And as mentioned before, distributors/buyers change their demands and they change their price levels. And the buyers who acquire a distribution license for a project to be released in their country, in their home territory, they will buy this license for a certain amount of time. They will pay a certain amount, which is a minimum guarantee, and they will then try to recoup their minimum guarantee by exploiting this project in their home market on all the available platforms. This sale to the local distributor is handled by a sales agent who will charge a sales agency fee for doing this work. The buyers are going to look at the script, they're going to look at the cast, they're going to look at the director, and they will decide what they feel this movie is worth to them. So the sales agent may give them a price that's A, but the buyer might say, you know what, I'd rather want to pay B. And this will give you an indication of what your project is actually worth in the marketplace when these conversations start to happen. The price level really has to do with what this kind of project is worth in this country. And not every country, for example, likes comedies. Not every country likes period dramas. So it really depends on who the buyer is and what their cultural taste bud entails. And that will dictate the pricing. Depending on who your buyer is, the bank will rate them, and rating means they will know, based on all the many movies that they have offered loans to, which of the buyers and distributors out there might be slow in paying, might not be paying at all, are they reliable. They will look at this kind of buyer as a basically like a credit score, and they will say, well, you know what, maybe Russia is not always great in paying on time, so we give that a tier 2. Means if Russia buys my movie for $1 million, the bank is going to discount this heavily when they're doing the pre-sale bank loan for me, and I might only get 500,000, meaning they will discount this tier 1 territory by 50%. Sorry, tier 2. Tier 1, on the other hand, are territories that are very reliable, that are very strong, that don't have a lot of economic changes, and the actual buyer that's buying this distribution license is actually be very reliable, always pays on time. So the bank's very happy to call this a tier 1 territory, and will then actually pay up to 100%, anywhere from 80 to 100. The U.S. territory is defined in most cases as U.S. and Canada. For sales estimates purposes, it's usually kept at 0 because the market is very volatile and it's very hard to guess what it could be. So the bank, as an unsold territory, will not lend against this territory at all. But when it comes to a pre-sale, U.S. buyers are very strong and would therefore be considered a tier 1 territory. We talked about why pre-sales are important. They verify the demand for the project in the marketplace. They are also supportive of the projected sales estimates. Imagine you have a set of sales estimates with a take pricing, and your international pre-sales come in much lower than that. What does it tell you? Well, it tells you that your sales estimates are out of whack and they need to be revisited. They need to be dropped down to the actual level of the actual pre-sales. It could also mean that maybe you get more than your take price. Maybe you get the ask price, in which case that's great, and you can keep the sales estimates as they are because they basically give you the worst case scenario, but you're going to likely make more money with your movie. Pre-sales are important for investors not only because they verify the marketplace and therefore reduce the risk, but they also reduce the amount of funding that is needed in order to close the financing. Needless to say, a bank loan is cheaper than an equity financing component, so there is a cost associated to it that makes this funding element also less expensive. Pre-sales are seen as a bankable collateral, so the bank will take a pre-sale contract and lend against it. And there are also not just banks, but also bank-like institutions that would do the same. There are even investors that would do the same. The banking will apply a tier 1 or tier 2 value to each distribution agreement, tier 1 being a strong buyer where the bank will pay 80 to 100% of whatever the minimum license fee was, and a tier 2 could be 50 to 75% of the minimum guarantee amount. We do have a basic understanding of what our risks are, so let's take a look and summarize them. We know we have to verify that we have a clean chain of title for our IP. We also have to make sure that our talent package supports the value proposition of our project and is verifiable as such through distribution and sales estimates. Not only that, but also through pre-sales. It is our understanding that the sales estimates for international distribution would be issued by a sales agent, and that we are really looking at the take level as a worst case scenario. We don't go and combine our film and compare it with, this is an independent comedy, we're going to compare it to My Big Fat Greek Wedding, the highest grossing comedy ever. We're going to compare it to movies that are on the same level and maybe some that actually lost some money, so we can get a verification that is somewhere in the middle. In the ideal world, however, you forget about those comparisons and just stick to the fact that your sales agent knows what they're doing in giving you the sales estimates, and the pre-sales are giving you an indication as to what the value of your project in the marketplace actually is. Your project finance plan should always include non-recoupable incentives. We call them free money. And you have to have them cash flowed in order to have them available for your production costs, to cover them, that is. You're going to verify with your bank that the sales agent projections are bankable. You're going to verify with the bank that the actual sales agent is bankable. And you're going to talk to your bank about what the term sheet would look like in regards to the pre-sale loan that they will give you and the gap loan that they will give you and the interest that you might have to pay for it. We're trying to make sure that our equity investor is going to invest not more than 35% in order to minimize his risk. We're going to look at the budget and our deal terms in relation to the budget and the production costs to make sure that they are developed in a feasible manner and that we're not being too expensive for what the value of our picture is in the marketplace. We're going to talk about the fact that we will insist on a collection agent taking care of all the revenues and manage all the expenses and profit distributions, as well as the reporting to all the parties that have invested in the film and that are part of the film in whatever form that relates to profit participation or recoupment. We will use a completion bond company to ensure the production, which is an insurance company that ensures the on-time and on-budget production of our project, which means we will not carry any risk in case of overages. We talked about major studios and the fact that they handle their accounting in-house, and we also discovered that it is important for us to have collection agents, not just for ourselves as a producer to make sure we actually make money, but for the investor who wants to make sure that his investment is secure and that his investment is being repaid and that no one enriches themselves before he sees any money or any profits. So the collection agent is a neutral, basically accounting entity that would put together a bank account for the production, and in that bank account all the distributors will pay in the minimum guarantees and distribution fees for the film, and then the collection agent would take all this money and pay the bank back, pay the mezzanine lender back, pay the equity investor back, pay everyone back including their premiums, and then distribute profits to whoever has profits in the film. They will issue reports every time they made a collection, and the latest every 3 months all the participants will get a collection report that shows exactly how much money was received in revenues and how much money was spent in expenses and how much profit is available and will be dispersed. When investors work with producers and producers work with investors, it's very important that both do due diligence on each other. The investor does a due diligence on the producer in a sense that they want to make sure that the producer knows what they're doing, has some track record, and has a good reputation. The producer will do the same with the investor to make sure that the investor actually has money and may require a proof of funds. The producer has to disclose all the risk. It's a legal requirement. If you don't disclose all the risks that are possible with this film, you could be subject to lawsuits. So you have to be very honest and say, dear investor, you may lose all your money. You will define your project value and market with the investor and explain to the investor why your project is going to potentially make money. You will do due diligence on the director, making sure that there's no black marks on the director, that the director is bondable, that he doesn't go over budget all the time. Not that you won't have a solution for that already because you're showing it with the completion bond, but the completion bond might say, we did our due diligence on the director and he always goes over budget and we were not going to bond him. So you as a producer will be aligned with the investor as it relates to risks and rewards, because you both are recouping at the same position. That said, the investor is probably going to recoup his investment in his premium before you would recoup your profit, which means you are absolutely aligned, because unless the investor is recouped, you will not see a dime. You would ideally apply a fair investor deal and would stick to industry standards, which means that the investor would invest a certain amount in relation to the budget and would own 50% of whatever that relation is as a back-end profit participation / IP ownership. There are investors out there who will ask for much more, and then it's up to you to decide if this is worth it or not. There are late payments if you, for example, have agreed an interest term or a term as to when you have to pay the money back. You know, sometimes equity obviously is not subject to a certain time frame, but maybe the investor gave you a loan and that would be subject to a certain time frame. And if you are paying late, the investor would apply likely a default mechanism, either a late fee, or they would take over the movie and just sell it themselves if you can't pay the loan back. Any milestones that the film or the television project has to reach or is promised should be put in writing. You should also agree an arbitration clause with your investors. That is a legally less expensive option of dealing with disputes. Your investor, depending on how much money he gives you, might take an active role, and you have to be able to manage that and really set the expectations right, what that means for the investor and especially what that means for you. You will reduce the production risk through the employment of a completion bond company, which will make sure that you do not go over budget and that the film is actually going to be finished and delivered. This is something that is going to be important for the investor and the bank, by the way. You should always insist on funds spent per budget line item. However, in some cases you might go over budget in the wardrobe department and you'll be under budget in the camera department. So there is a way to balance things out, but in the end of the day, the idea is to stay within the line items as much as possible. You're going to protect the investor by employing the collection agent and having the collection agent handle all revenues, expenses, and profit distributions. This is also going to be good for you as the producer because the liability will not be yours as it relates to revenue, expenses, and distribution of profits. Most importantly, you will protect the master elements of your film. Now, nowadays, most of the elements are digital, so it's not such a big deal. In the early days, when we still had 35mm rolls stored somewhere in a lab, we had to make sure we had lab access, and we had to make sure they were stored the right way so that they not get destroyed. We already talked about the feasibility component as it relates to budgeting, but we also have to kind of address the fact that the quality is important too. So when you are facing the situation that you have put together a budget and the sales estimates are too low, you will have to make a decision what you're going to do. And the options that you have is you could increase the cast level, which would automatically increase the value of your project, or you could reduce the budget by changing maybe certain script elements. You should also be very careful about how you're changing your production cost if you're decreasing them, not to affect the production quality and the look of your film. You are looking at the various fees in your budget, and you want to make sure that they stay either within the industry standard frames or lower. So it's really important that you take a very close look at each and every line item, make sure it stays within standards. When you put your budget together, you look at a few considerations. You are obviously trying to adhere to customary fees for the team, cast, producers, distributors, the rights, the post-production, etc. You might be bound to certain rates because you are doing a guild picture or guild project where IATSE rates or other guild rates are applicable and you have to adhere to them. There might also be a situation where the completion bond requires you to have a certain level of budget, and you're going to have to figure out how you agree with the completion bond on the budget that they want in order to make sure that their insurance is not going to be applicable and their risk is going to be kept low. You are scheduling, your prep, your principal photography and your post in a way that is adhering to the funds available for each of the periods. And you can, if you see that you are still too high in your budget, think about deferring certain fees. You can have conversations with cast, director, or team members, or anyone really, to see if they would be willing to defer a portion or all of their fee into profits, so that your budget would in essence be lower, so that you can actually do the project, and then the people that agreed to defer their fees would be paid from profits. what would likely happen is that they would ask for a little more because they are, not taking risk. But sometimes it's worth, taking that risk in order for the project to get made. On this page you have a summary about the various fees that could be applicable in your budget. Again, these are ranges and they vary very much with the kind of project that you're doing. So just take a look at this, and when you put your next budget together for your project, this could be maybe a little bit of a reference for you. We talked about the funding component of a project, but as important as the funding component is the recoupment component. And depending on who is investing with you and who is giving you money, depending on who the financier is, they have a different position as it relates to the recoupment of their investment or of their financing. Some of them are actually not recouping at all from you. They might be recouping, but they might recoup from a different area. For example, the tax credit lender who basically cash flows tax credits to you or tax incentives to you, they recoup from the actual local region to pay them back. They don't recoup from you, so you don't pay them back. As it relates to crowdfunding investors, for example, they did a Kickstarter campaign or something like that, they got a t-shirt or a hat or something or a credit, so this is also not an amount you would be recouping because they already got something for the money that they gave you. As it relates to bank, mezzanine, and equity lender, those have to be recouped. In the case of equity and mezzanine, they have to also recoup an additional premium in addition to their principal. Each of these entities recoup in a certain position in the recoupment structure, which is also referred to as the waterfall. The bank will always recoup first, the mezzanine lender will always recoup after the bank, and then the mezzanine lender will recoup their premium. The equity investor comes after the mezzanine lender has recouped, and then the equity will recoup a premium. If you have deferments, then they would recoup after the premium of the equity investor. And after that, everyone would participate in profits at the same time in relation to the profit percentage that was agreed. Gets a little more fancy in the waterfall and recoupment schedule when we have a movie that actually went in the theaters and was theatrically released, because here what you have now is you had to pay a P&A lender, or P&A was paid by someone to create a release campaign, and that money is recouped first from box office revenues, and the P&A lender will likely ask for a premium which will be recouped as well. So then you imagine the balance of the money going into the collection account, and the next one in line would then be your collection agent. If you are doing the movie as a guild movie and you have, for example, SAG actors in there, residuals would be applicable. They would be recouped next, unless the bank requires to be recouping before the residuals, the guild residuals are recouping. That's sometimes a conversation. The sales agent would be recouping his fee and his distribution cost as well. Again, this could be a conversation with the bank where the bank says, you know what, sales agent, I want to be recouping before you, and you're not getting your sales agent until I am recouped. So the senior loan that's currently in rank 6 could jump up all the way to rank 3 depending on the conversations between the parties. The mezzanine lender would always be recouping in that position number 7 if you have a mezzanine lender, and the premium would be position number 8. The equity comes after the premium, and the premium equity comes after the mezzanine premium, and the equity premium comes after the equity principal. If you have deferments, you will recoup them after your equity was paid back. At the end of it all, you have a profit, and now your back end profit participations will happen as applicable. When we focus on risk diversification and profit optimization, we have to think about including non-recoupable finance elements, as we call them, free money. We'll definitely have to think about the cost of our financing, meaning we're trying to put in the lowest cost financing and as much as we can, meaning your senior debt is probably the least expensive. We are looking at restricting production costs as much as we can. We might, defer some fees in order to keep the production costs low. We're obviously looking at restricting our distribution costs, meaning the sales fee, the distribution expenses. We are optimizing the waterfall by making sure that everyone has a very strict position and that they are adhering to that position. And we're going to make sure that we establishing a project that can achieve profits in the first place and not as something where we haven't verified a certain market demand is applicable. Every finance element, as I mentioned before, has a cost associated to it. So let's look at each of them and then we can understand what the cost is and what their risk profile is, their risk level is. So bank financing, meaning the cash loan of pre-sales and our senior loan or gap loan, would be subject to a loan fee and a legal fee as well as an interest. And the interest for this kind of loan is usually LIBOR driven. It's LIBOR plus something, 1, 2, whatever the bank agrees. But it's not something that the bank just makes up and decides, just by themselves. It's driven by whatever the LIBOR rate is in the country. The bank will require a 200% coverage for unsold territories because this is an unsecured loan. What does 200% coverage mean? A few of you had a question about that. It really just means that if the bank gives you $1, they want you to cover $2. That's what 200% means. $1 is 100%, $2 is 200%. And what it means for you is pretty straightforward. Whatever the rights are that you have not pre-sold, whatever that value is, you cut that by half. That's when you know what the collateral would be that is available for your gap loan. Now, if that collateral is more than 20% of your budget, you're out of luck because all you get from the bank is 20% of the budget, and that's the cap for gap. The risk profile is very low because bank loans are usually under 24 months and they are recouped in first position, which is why the risk profile is limited. The recoupment position would be after the P&A, the collection and distribution cost. Unless otherwise requested, as we said earlier, the bank might say, I want to recoup before the collection agent, before the distribution costs. They will never recoup before P&A. Next in line is the mezzanine lender. The mezzanine lender is basically a hybrid between a loan and an equity financier. It's when you look at like two floors, the bank is floor 1, the equity is floor 2, the mezzanine is right in the middle. Because the mezzanine is partially a loan and partially an equity investment. It is a loan in the sense that there is a term associated to it and they have the right to take over the film from you if you don't pay them back within that term. That's similar to what a bank would do if you don't pay them back. They also have the right to charge an interest or a premium, which makes them a bit of an equity lender. And sometimes they even request a back-end participation. The fees could include loan fees, legal fees, interest, executive producer fees, and back-end profit participation. The collateral for this loan is also the unsold territories. When you remember that the bank is basically holding only 50% of your unsold territories as a monetary value, meaning the loan you're actually getting is basically just reflective of 50% of your unsold territories, you still have another 50% unsold territories even when you paid the bank back. So after you paid the bank, the pre-sales obviously already paid because the pre-sale buyers have paid their money, but after the gap is paid, you have 50% of your unsold territory still available to recoup against something. This is the collateral that the mezzanine lender will leech onto and say, this is what I'm lending against. They're not requiring a 200% coverage because their risk profile is a little higher. So they will just look at what collateral you have available right now and will lend against that. The recoupment position would be basically after the P&A, after the collection agent, after the distribution costs and expenses, and after the bank. The risk profile for this kind of financing is medium because the term is medium and they're not in as much of a risk position than the equity lender would be. And the equity financing is the next financing we're discussing. The fees associated to equity financing is premium on the equity, sometimes an executive producer fee, which is usually when you have to squeeze in the budget and cannot deduct from the equity investment provided to you. So that means that somewhere you have to make room. You can't just increase the budget by it or ask the investor to deduct it from the investment. It doesn't work. And they will require a back-end profit participation, in a sense that they will hold an IT in perpetuity with you. So if this film doesn't recoup on the level of just distribution revenues, for example, and you figure out, I want to write a book about it, I want to do a TV series with it, or I'm going to do whatever else with it, a spin-off. If you do something else with the IP, the equity investor would still be a part of that equation. Just keep that in mind, because they participate with you in the IP. The risk profile is high because they really are betting on the performance and the upside of this project. They are in it for the long haul. They're in it for the life of the IP. They're in it for the library value of your IP. The recouping behind the P&A, the collection agent, the distribution expenses and costs, the bank, the mezzanine, and the deferments sometimes. I put deferments here before equity because in my films I have seen that, or I should say I have paid deferments out before the equity investor was paid. And the reason I did that, I was able to do that, is that I told the equity investor, I reduce your risk by reducing the production cost right now by getting the film made. I'm reducing your risk because I need less of your money. But the deferment is still a part of the production cost, and for you, equity investor, I have to recoup the production cost first before I can pay you back. So that's a reasonable conversation to have with an equity investor. That is why I wanted to bring it up here, so you know that these options are available to you. The tax credit loan is a non-recoupable funding component, which means that the tax credit is provided to you by a location that you shoot the movie in as an incentive for you to go and shoot there. The tax credit lender that will take your opinion letter as to how much money you will get from this region as their collateral, they will take this and they will lend against it. And for the eventuality that you don't spend as much, or that something goes wrong, or just simply by the fact that they want to make money, they will charge a discount. They will charge somewhere around 10 to 15, sometimes even 20% of the tax credit that would be due to you, and with that, their risk is going to be covered, which means you do not pay them back. This is something. If they don't get paid back, they cannot come to you and say, producer, I'd like you to pay me back. I actually had a situation where I shot a movie in Iowa, and I was doing the film under the 50% Iowa production incentive, which was there for all of 5 minutes. And my tax credit lender was not able to get paid back by Iowa because they shut down because before my tax credit lender could get their $5 million back. So obviously they knocked on my door and said, we want the $5 million from you. And I was within my right to say no. So the same applies for you. The tax credit lender is not going to be one that is going to be paid back by you. Their collateral is the actual tax credit, and that's it. They will sometimes charge an executive producer fee, and they will also sometimes charge a legal fee, both of which would be deducted from the loan that they will give you. Crowdfunding is basically, as you all know, something like a Kickstarter campaign or a GoFundMe campaign or something. It is not an amount that you would pay back. However, sometimes you are paying commissions to whoever the site is, so your net amount is probably lower than what the actual crowdfunded amount is, and you might have some back-end participation applicable here, where the crowdfunder says, we don't want to get paid back, but we want some of the upside. So they might say to you, or the entire crowdfunding group might be subject to a small back-end profit participation. In-kind services is also non-recoupable, because in-kind services could be anything from the post-production house saying, we're not going to charge you for certain post-production services, we're going to either defer them or we're going to make them an investment, and you pay us back later, they would be paid back in the, they would be paid back after the equity investor is paid back. That's usually the place. Sometimes they request to be paid back before the equity investor is paid back. It's a negotiation that you can have. And in some cases, they will require a back-end participation as well. But in most cases, they will take it as a in-kind service that you will not have to pay back, where they are simply agreeing with you to be part of the profits. There are various free money options. The easiest one that you will find on the Entertainment Partners website are all the various US production incentives that are available at any given time. Now, they change all the time, so it's really important for you to look at them, check on them, and see if they're changing, what they're changing, because there are many changes happening all the time. It could be that they just stop the program, it could be that they run out of money, it could be that they change the eligibility. They decide today we are paying against above the line some money, and then tomorrow they decide, you know what, we're not going to pay for above the line. So there are changes constantly happening. International production incentives are a little bit different. International grants and subsidies are more established. They are there for a very long time. They usually don't change, but they are subject to you entering into a co-production agreement with a local producer and adhering to local treaty regulations. So make sure that you find a local producer who explains these to you very carefully. They will ask probably for a producer fee to do all this for you, and they might even ask for some back-end profit participation. That's a negotiation that you can have with them, but it's really worth it because international co-productions can get you up to 50% of your budget for free. Branding and product placement is obviously something you can discuss with a integration company like Spark Alliance. You saw Devery Holmes in the interview in the course material, and this is someone you can approach whenever you have a project that has some kind of distribution already, because brands need to know where the project is going to end up being seen in order for them to be integrated. You could do something like a collateral corridor driven investment, like a music investment, where the music investor basically offers to pay for your entire music budget, and in return would receive any and all royalties associated to the score and any original music in this film. Usually you would be the one as a producer to receive the royalties, and you might share them with whoever did the composing and the original music. You might even have some song licensed. All of this would be paid for by the music investment company, and they would then be the ones enjoying the revenues from royalties. In-kind services we have talked about before, could be post-production, could be crowdsourcing, and those are as well not paid back in most cases. A co-production deal is actually something that is also possible with a US production company. So let's say, for example, you do a split rights deal with the US distributor where you say, I'm going to co-finance this project, this television series, and I'm going to finance 50% of it, or 30% of it, or 25% of it, and you, US partner, are going to finance the balance. And because you do, we're going to split the rights. You're going to keep the US rights and maybe the Canadian rights, and I'm going to keep the foreign rights. This is referred to as actually a US co-production or a split rights deal. International co-productions can get you up to 50% of your budget, and it would be subject to a treaty between the co-producing countries. US is not part of any treaties, so you're going to again have to do a deal with a local co-producer. Let's say the local co-producer says to you, I'm going to do a UK-German co-production. This would be a treaty co-production between the UK and Germany. And even though you are an American producer, you can still be a part of it through your European co-producing partner. The reason why these treaty co-productions are done is to be able to optimize on the various areas in Europe to get more money. Because at some point you might run into a situation where you capped out in Germany, and even if you shoot more in Germany, you're not going to get more out of Germany. So you move your ship and shoot some part of the movie in London, where you can get another 25% of your budget. These kind of structures can be done in order to optimize the money that you will have available for free. Some of these co-productions will be funding also or paying for above the line, even if it's American cast, as long as they're on the European soil, and some of them will not. So you have to really talk to the US, you have to talk to not the US, but the international co-producer, and they will be able to guide you and tell you exactly what expenses are eligible and what are not. The US incentives we have here would be tax credit and tax rebates. For you, it doesn't really matter if it's a tax credit or a rebate, because you're being a smart producer and you let it be, you know, pre-cash flow to you anyway. So you don't care what the baby is called. But in essence, what it means is that the credit or rebate varies from state to state. The production expense must happen in the region that you get the rebate or tax credit from. And you need to look very carefully into what costs that you're spending there, or what expenses that you're spending there are actually eligible for a rebate or a credit. Who makes a profit and who makes money on a project and why is not the same for everyone. Everyone has a slightly different interest and a slightly different position in the film. So we mentioned earlier, the bank is happy to be able to be the first one in the recoupment corridor and the first one to recoup, and for them, they basically look at the collateral that's available. They make money by charging interest fees and they're charging loan fees, and they are very happy for their loan to be a short term. They would be taking over the picture in case the loan is not paid back. So for them, they're pretty risk-free because they would have the entire movie available to them if whatever bank loan they gave you, which is never more than 20%, is not paid to them. It's a pretty good deal for them. The mezzanine lender is going to look at the collateral that's available after the bank has tapped their collateral. And they're going to look at potential US upside. They will look at this film and say, well, I have this much available from the foreign rights because the bank is not taking it, but what is actually possible in the US? So for them, the interest is to charge you a premium, to charge you an interest fee, and to have a term on their loan that's specified. So if you don't pay them back in a certain time, they too will end up with the film. The equity investor is going to look at your film and saying, after the mezzanine lender and the bank has recouped, what's going to be available for me and how do I make money? Well, they make money because they are charging a premium, but they're also going to be connected to the IP no matter what you do with it. You do a remake, you do a series, they are connected with it, unless you did a different deal with them where you are excluding these things. I have to say that I've done both. I've had equity investors where I said, if you are not whole in this movie, I'm going to, if I do a spin-off or this and the other, I will, take you over there. I've also done deals with equity investors where that was not the case, where just this movie and the revenue from this movie throughout the life of the movie is going to be the potential profit component for the equity investor. For the producer, the profit comes from the producing fee in the budget, because they are subject and should get a producing fee because they also do the work. They are actually physically producing the movie. And they are then interested to make sure that every funding element is going to be at least expensive as possible, because the producer, has to pay everyone back first and has to pay all their premiums first before he sees a dime in the net profits. So this is something where he's going to make sure that everything stays feasible. He's also interested in the fact that the budgets will stay feasible and that any and all expenses are kept low. For the sales agent, it's a pretty straightforward picture. The sales agent will look at a picture and say, well, I'm not investing anything here unless the sales agent offers a minimum guarantee up front, which would then replace the bank loan. But if he doesn't do that, then he basically makes money with every territory he sells. And all he needs to know is this is a movie that he can sell. He is interested in making sure that the package is strong, that the script is strong, because if he has something to sell that's good, that helps him. And the faster and the easier he can sell it, the better. The tax credit lender will look at the state or the country that they're lending against, and that's really the component for them that's going to make or break the deal. If they are asked to cash flow a tax credit or a tax rebate or a subsidy potentially that is in a territory or in a country or in a state that is shaky, where there are a lot of changes, or there is a rumor that the incentive is not going to be there for long, or that they're going to run out of money, they will then think twice if they're going to cash flow this credit or not. They are usually paid pretty fast because the payment occurs the minute the production is done and the expenses have been provided to the state, maybe during a tax return or through a tax period, and usually the tax credit lender would be paid back within 12 to 18 months, unless he is cash flowing a credit where the tax credit region says we're going to pay you back in installments, not all at once, which is the case in New York. The post-production services, they have the advantage of being able to connect early on to a project where they can ensure a product flow. So they're very eager to get as many projects into the post-production house as possible. So for them, they like to offer some deals in order to say, okay, you're definitely coming and doing the post-production with us. Music investment is its own little bubble, because all they care about is lots of scoring and lots of original music in your project so that they can make lots of royalties. This is the summary of the various profitability profiles. When we talk about the waterfall, we're really talking about all the people that are part of the CAMA, which is the Collection Agent Management Agreement. Those parties would be the producer, might be the crew, depending on who has offered deferments, would be the talent, any service provider who deferred their fees, anyone who has a profit participation would be in the collection agency agreement, SAG, if it's a SAG movie, or any guild who is part of this production. Obviously the investors and financiers. Banks are not always in the collection agreement. They might decide that they want to be recouping first, and then after the bank has recouped, the funds go into the collection agent agreement. I've seen both. It really depends on what the bank prefers. Bond companies are going to be part of the collection agreement, and sales agent and distributors are going to be part of the collection agreement. The waterfall describes how and when revenues are received, how and when expenses are paid, how and to whom profits are to be distributed. And it is managed through the collection agent management agreement and the instruction letter that is attached to the CAMA. The collection agreement is one of the most important agreements you will ever enter into when you do your project. It's a pretty little picture here that kind of shows you what happens when you have a theatrical movie which has box office revenues that need to be recouped. Because what happens here is box office revenues are established, people buy tickets, money goes somewhere. It goes to the theater exhibitor. The theater exhibitor will keep a certain percentage of the ticket. Could be 30 to 50%, sometimes might be even more, sometimes might be even less. The balance would go to the domestic distributor or the studio. The studio will then pay the P&A back and the applicable fees, the premium, and will also deduct any minimum guarantee that it might have paid. If it didn't pay it, great. If it did pay it, it will deduct that, as well as any distribution fees studio will charge. Whatever is left will then go into the collection agent management account, together with the foreign revenues that the sales agent has done by selling the foreign distribution rights. In some cases, it depends on what movie it is, the guilds will be recouping right after, or the collection agent would be recouping first, right after the revenues are coming in. It really depends on, again, the conversation with the guilds. The collection agent will charge 1% of the revenues that have been placed in the collection account. The sales agent will then be next in charging the sales agency fee and expenses. And after that, the bank will start recouping. We mentioned before that it is very possible that the bank decides, I want to be first, all of you have to come after, which means SAG would be pushed back, the sales agent would be pushed back, the collection agent would be pushed back. Everyone would be coming after the senior lender. So this is a possibility. The mezzanine lender will recoup after the bank has recouped, and in this case, after all the other people, the sales agent, the collection agent, and SAG, of course. The equity lender will come after the mezzanine lender, and deferments will come after the equity, unless they have been agreed to come before the equity, which is a possibility. And the last portion in the waterfall here is going to be your profit participation, which is going to happen to everyone equally. It's subject to the percentage that was agreed. We talked a little bit about what the collection agent does. He collects all the revenues in relation to a movie and spends and disperses all the agreed expenses and the profits. He is responsible to speak to any and all party to the collection agent management agreement, which includes the sales agent, the producer, the financiers, the guilds, the co-producers, profit participants, deferred participants, completion guarantor, the talent, the merchandising, the broadcasters and distributors, if they're part of the project, and anyone else who receives revenues. We talked about our free money sources before. This is just to recap what free money is. Free money is money you don't have to pay back. Could be money from US production incentives, foreign subsidies and grants, sponsorships and brands, crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, music investment, and in-kind service deals. We established that US production incentives and tax credits and rebates are production incentives provided by the region that you're shooting in. We also talked about the percentages that are available. Could be as low as 15, could be as high as 40, depending on where you're going. We are already clear about the fact that not every line item in the budget might be an eligible expense. So it's really important to look into the region that you're shooting and have a conversation with someone locally to make sure that you understand exactly how much money net to the budget you would have, depending on what you're actually expending there and what the region considers as an eligible expense. We did talk a little bit about the fact that when you go into a foreign country to be receiving an international incentive and you don't really have a European passport, you're going to need a local co-producer to combine forces with. And you can shoot just in one country, or you can combine 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 countries under the treaty co-production agreements, which will allow you to potentially get more money than you would get just in one country. In most cases, the foreign incentives, are cash flowed by the foreign subsidizing entity, so you do not need to have them cash flowed by a tax credit lender in most cases. The reason why brand integration and sponsorship is a little bit more of a hot commodity these days is because the brands are kind of going away from commercials, regular commercials on television, because no one watches television. I shouldn't say no one, but the ratings have definitely dropped. People are going online to watch content on demand, or DVRing their content. in very many cases do they just forward through the commercials and don't watch them, and brands know this. So what do? They look at different ways of getting their message across, and they're looking at ways to combine with content providers that are organically integrating their product or their message. So it's not as simple as I put the Coke bottle on the table and it's just seen on the screen and I get $1 million. It is the conversation that could be happening around the Coke bottle being in the hand of the lead actor. It could be an integration that happens through application. For example, we're doing a dog show, and we are talking about a certain toy that would be good for aggressive dogs, and we're actually using that toy, and that toy was given to us by a toy company like Kong or someone. So we are applying this special thing in a special case, and it really features what it can do. This is really what organic integration looks like, and that's what brands pay money for. They pay money for exposure as well. So it's not enough just to say my show is on TV. It would also have to be somewhere online. It would also have to be integrated in some other form. It's all about giving eyeballs to the brands, and as many as you can. The nice thing about integrating a brand is that the brand integrates you as well, which means if, for example, the brand, as we mentioned earlier, the toy company Kong gives you a toy, and I'll put it in the show, in my dog show, and it's been beautifully integrated, its features have been beautifully shown, and then what Kong might do on their website, they might show this segment or this episode of my show. So automatically my exposure becomes larger through the brand exposure, because they're using the material that I shot and put it on their social media, in their stores. So it is a hand-in-hand, interest-aligned situation that is beneficial for both parties. Richard Botto would do such a better job than I do when I explain crowdfunding versus crowdsourcing. I'm going to make it quick. One is someone pledges money. The other one is someone pledges a service. It's as simple as that. We talked earlier about what in-kind service deals are, for example, in post-production. It could also be not just post-production, could be a visual effects house. When I did my Halle Berry movie, I had to put together some sharks. Usually, those sharks would be part of the visual effects component in the movie, because you can't really shoot real sharks and they don't usually show up on cue. So these are my visual effects that I had to work with a company that's actually a very big company. They do the Hunger Games, etc., etc. So there wasn't really a way for me to afford them. And only because the owner of the company is a dear friend of mine, also from Germany, and he gave me a deferment, I should say an investment, an in-kind service investment, in saying that he will basically just do this entire thing for 50% of what it actually cost. So visual effects is an in-kind service that can be provided, post-production is an in-kind service that can be provided, crowdsourcing is an in-kind service that can be provided, because again, it's a service that's budgeted that you don't pay for, because the person or the company is not going to charge you. So these are the kind of things that are important for you to employ, because what they do is they reduce the cost, and by reducing the cost, they reduce your risk. At some point you have to put together a little business plan for your own project. And what you need to do is you really need to research exactly what the business cases you want to make. You're going to research your financials, you apply everything you learned here, you're going to research who's out there competing with you, and you're going to research your audience, you're going to research your market, you're going to research who would you go to distribute your project. You're going to research locations in order to optimize your finance plan. You're going to ideally combine forces with established executives who can help you get this thing on its way. You really have to define your vision, and you have to define why your story is relevant today. Why are you telling it today? You're going to rehearse the presentation with people that hopefully give you honest feedback, and then you are going to figure out a way to show that you have skin in the game by maybe putting up a little bit of money, by financing some development yourself, just showing the investor that yours and his interest is aligned. So practically what that looks like when you put your business expose together, you're going to establish this expose in a very visual manner, because you only get one shot to show something, and especially because you're working on a business plan that is to do with a visual media, it needs to look good. There's just no doubt about it. So think about what kind of color scheme, what kind of mood you want to create in your presentation. Obviously, the presentation would include a summary of the story. Your summary of the script could be 1 page. Some of the characters, the leading characters, would have to be laid out. You can also talk about who you would want to cast in those lead characters. You can mention if you have someone already attached. You would include the director's letter of intent as well as a director's vision. You, as I said, can include some cast ideas unless you already have some attached, and if you do, you would include the letter of intents for the cast as well. Again, I would suggest you attach a senior executive producer who can guide you through the process, but also gives the investor a bit of a comfort level that there is someone there who knows what they're doing. Talk about who your audience is, define your market, and figure out what your distribution strategy is and why you're deciding this strategy to be applicable. Get your numbers straight, put your sales estimates together, offer some relevant statistics maybe in the subject matter that you are dealing with in your project. You would obviously introduce yourself and your team as well as your department heads, and if you have LOIs for some of the department heads, it would be great to attach them as well. You would put a budget together, but you only need to put a top sheet in your business expose. You would provide your international sales estimates. You can kind of make them yourselves, but it would be good if you have a sales agent that would put a stamp on it. You would then go and you figure out what your preliminary finance plan would look like, and the reason why that's important is you need to at some point figure out what you're going to ask the investor for that you're giving this business expose to. You run your calculations from all these revenue sources, and you run calculations for low, medium, and high. Investors want to see 3 calculations. They want to see what could happen and what's the worst case scenario. Be honest about the risk and offer some mitigation tactics, meaning you tell them we're going to have a completion bond company that will make sure that we're not going over budget. I'm going to have this amazing distributor who is very experienced and is selling similar product, things like that. You figure out how much money you're going to ask the investor for, and you figure out what the investor could be making. What is his ROI? What's his return? And what are the terms you're looking to suggest to him? Tell the investor exactly what the collateral is, and make sure that the investor understands that his interests and your interests are truly aligned. Obviously, you're going to make sure that you put an option agreement, and if you can put a chain of title, clearance report in your business plan. You don't have to, it's not necessary, but the option agreement for sure. And then I would say include letter of intents from everyone you can get it. Sales agents, cast members, cast members, directors, finance partners, distributors, etc. Anyone who you feel has a sales value in essence that makes your project look better and increases its value for an investor, you should provide an LOI from. Understand the risks, divulge them, and mitigate them, and explain to the investor in your expose how you go about that. We talked a little bit about terms that are applicable for some of these agreements that are important, but we also need to talk about what's applicable for you. What you would do as a producer, you could do 2 things. You could put a little company together for your production company if you are a producer, if that's what you want. So the production company would then produce all the movies that you would ever produce, let's say. And then for this very special project, you put a single purpose vehicle company together, which is only to do with this one project. And the reason why you want to do that is because you want to limit your risk just to this project. If something would go wrong with this project and you would start being involved in lawsuits, and these things happen, trust me, I know, that's the price of success. So let's say you get sued on your project. It's very important to ring fence that project in this single purpose vehicle, because then it cannot affect your production company entirely and other projects that might be in the production company. So that's why you limit your risk by doing both. And you can very simply just put together, if you're in the US, a little LLC. You can literally do this online. I think it costs like $150. So it's very easy to do. We're going to talk about some of the essential development, production, and packaging terms. We're going to look into finance distribution agreements and terms, and we're going to look a little bit at the completion bond and the producer agreements. The agreements you will most likely find in your production, and these are not all of them, but they're the most important ones, is obviously your option rights purchase agreement, your talent deals, your finance deals, your producer deals, your marketing and publicity deals, and your bank closing and bank terms, your bond deal, and your chain of title. Let's talk about some of the essential terms that would be applicable. So for the option and rights agreement, if you have hired a guild writer, you need to adhere to guild requirements. The option rights should be at least 1 year, if not more. The option payment you make should be against the purchase price. There would be a turnaround clause in that agreement, which basically means that if the project that you're working on is not done by you and it's done by someone else, you would be asking this other person to pay you a turnaround fee, which is basically paying you back for all the costs that are related to the development of the project. Obviously, you talk about rewrites in there in your rights purchase agreement. You talk about the chain of title having to be clear, and you are requesting the writer to be, or you want the writer to be, in the collection agent management agreement in case they are a profit participant, which they might be. As it relates to the talent deal for the director, sometimes the director is sent a pay or play offer. Sometimes it's just a letter that says, I want you and here's what you're going to get. In some cases, the director would want a development deal to work with you on the script. And the director should be hired subject to cast approval and subject to the bond company approving the director. Because if you hire a director that your cast doesn't want to be working with, you have to have an out. If you hire a director that is not bondable, you have to have an out. You will talk to the director about the remuneration as well as a back-end profit participation if applicable. You'll make sure that the director is not going to insist on final cut. It's usually a headache. Don't want that headache. But you can offer the director to apply DGA rules and regulations, even if the director is not in the DGA. What that means is that the director would get a chance to have a screening happen that would basically decide whether or not the director cut is has a good chance of being successful or not. Because after the director cut is ready, it's going to be your job as the producer to change it if you want to. The director should be in the CAMA if he has a profit participation. As it relates to the talent deal, it all starts with the pay-up-play offer that you would send. The deal would then done with the actual loan-out agreement, meaning you do an engagement letter and an engagement agreement with your cast. The deal you do with the cast would be subject to them approving the director. It would be subject to the bond approving them, meaning, if the cast member might be, a drug addict, you don't know, and the bond company says we don't want to hire him because he didn't pass the health test, then this would be an out. You discuss how much money you're going to pay as a remuneration and your back-end participation if there is one. You will make sure that the talent has no creative approval, and you are going to apply SAG rules if they are applicable. The talent would be in the CAMA if they have a back-end profit participation. The sales agency agreement would be so that you would have to approve the sales estimates the agent issues, and you would have to agree a certain, I should say, performance clause that says that the agent would, based on the sales estimates that they gave you, reach a certain level of sales within a certain level of time. You would limit the term for the sales agency agreement, ideally to not more than 7 years. You would make sure that the sales agent understands that they have no creative approval, that they cannot transfer the rights, and you would specify what the sales fee is and cap the market and distribution expenses at a certain amount. You would enter in this agreement as well that if the bank requires the sales agent to defer their fees after the loan, the sales agent would do so. And you agree on delivery elements that are going to be given to the sales agent so that they can deliver the film to the distributors, and you would include the sales agent into the KAMA, and of course you would make sure that they agree to a collection agent. The distribution agreements are usually entered into by the sales agent. It's an agreement that the sales agent negotiates with the distributor. However, if you do a deal with, let's say, a domestic distributor like a studio or mini major studio or anyone who releases the film domestically, you might ideally want to make sure you get a minimum guarantee up front, and you would make sure that you also get overages in case of the project or the film being successful, and would make money in excess of the minimum guarantee. In that case, a split would be agreed, which would be payable to you and the studio after the studio has charged the distribution costs and expenses. You would of course agree payment terms, what are they paying, when they're paying a down payment or not. You would agree the term, how long will they have the right to license the film in the US. You would agree the specific rights, is it a theatrical, is it television, is it streaming, is it all of the above. You would agree the territory, is it the US, is it the US and Canada, is it something else in addition. You would agree what delivery elements the studio would want to get sent. Maybe they need a lot, maybe they need just little things, maybe they need a trailer, maybe they want posters. All of these things are agreed. And you would make sure that the distribution entity, given this is just an acquisition deal, does not have any creative approval. For the production LLC, and this could be applicable for your SPV as well as for your production entity, depending on who is part of this production LLC, you would put together an operating agreement that basically specifies what the production company does and who the members are and who holds what share. It talks about profit splits if there are other members involved in this LLC. It will discuss a budget that is allocated for overhead. You will figure out in what state you will list the LLC, any taxes that might have to be applicable, how the accounting is handled, what scope is going to be allocated to whom. You will talk about control of the project rights, and you would make sure, obviously, that this production company is part of the KAMA. If it is the SPV, it's going to be part of all of these agreements, because it's this production company, this SPV, that will enter into any and all of the agreement related to your project, including, this is the next one, the crew deals. So the crew deals are done, could be done by you, could be done by a production lawyer, and they will include all the things like it's an independent contractor, or is it a payroll situation? Is Entertainment Partners going to be the payroll company that deals with everything? Is it going to be a guild applicable contract? How much do you pay them? How much do you pay for travel? How much do you pay for overtime? Are there any box rentals? What is the term of the agreement? What is the scope of work? And what is the credit that they're going to get? The legal service agreement could be one where it could be a deal just for this particular picture, or it could be a deal for the entire production company. But let's assume it's just for this picture. You have options which are that you can agree for the lawyer to be just getting a percentage of the budget, which happens, or they would get a retainer and then an hourly rate for the work, and they would just bill you. I would always go for a percentage in the budget and make it like a capped amount, basically saying this is the amount you get no matter how much legal services you will give me, because that way you don't have any bad surprises. The producer service agreement is one where you as a producer would either do this deal with the completion bond company, which it would be a deal between you and them, saying them telling you what your job is, or it would be a deal between you and another producer who might be on the project with you. Either way, you will define the scope of the service, you will define if there's any approvals to anyone, you will define the fee if there's any backend, any deferments, and you will define if this producer has rights to the IP or not. If you're talking about the guild signatory agreement, this is something that's only applicable if you are shooting the film in the US under the guilds, in which case your SPV is going to have to be a guild signatory. So that's a special agreement that the guilds are preparing, that it's kind of a form, and the guilds will be part of the CAM agreement. The completion bond deal really focuses on a few things. It focuses on the budget, which becomes the bonded budget, the schedule, which becomes the bonded production schedule, the production cash flow plan, which basically shows when, how much money is released to you in order to pay for the production costs that are coming up. It's a bonded production cash flow schedule. Completion bond will talk about talent, who's in your movie. They will make sure that this talent is going to be signing all the paperwork the completion bond requires from them. They won't like stop dates, so try to avoid those, which means that, you know, if the actor is going to be doing another movie after you, make sure that there's at least 2 to 3 weeks in between. Otherwise, the bond company is going to make a stop date applicable, which means that date is the one the actor will leave your set no matter if you're ready with him or not. Not ideal. Another thing you want to avoid is essential elements. This is something that sometimes buyers will require when they buy your movie. They will say to you, okay, you have a script and you have Jason Statham starring. I want to make sure that Jason Statham is actually going to be in this movie, otherwise I'm not going to pay. That's called an essential element. What you want to do instead is you want to say, Jason Statham is in my movie, but it might be that he might not be, in which case I will replace him with someone of equal or better caliber. This language, equal or better caliber, equal or higher caliber, is one that you want to put in the agreement with the distributor, because that way you don't need to have the essential clause in the agreement. You will talk about producer fees with your completion bond. They might be requiring for you to hold some back, and will pay them to you once you've done a good job and delivered the movie. And they will talk to you about your team, your production team, your main team, to make sure that everyone is bondable. We talked about a lot of this already, but I'm going to just walk through just some of the finance elements, elements that are important for the finance agreements. For the mezzanine deal, let's start with that because it's the first one here. You would agree a certain interest rate, a premium, an executive producer fee, a loan fee, and a back end. In some cases, it's not all of it, it's just some of it, but it's, you know, a portion of what you would agree. The term for a mezzanine deal could be anywhere from 12 to 36 months. You will define what the collateral is. You will also define if they will take over your movie if you don't pay. So that's a default scenario that's going to be going in there. You will define the recoupment position, and you will make sure that they're in the CAMA agreement. For the equity deal, you will talk about the back-end participation and ownership in the IP. In the ideal world, whatever the investment is that the equity investor gave you in relation to the budget, 50% of that should be reflective of the ownership in the IP. Depending on how much money you get from the equity investor, you might have to agree to some kind of a creative or business approval component, and you want to make sure that the equity investor is included in the CAMA. For any and all of the financiers, by the way, you are definitely making sure that you define the recoupment position very specifically. The incentives loan is a deal that you do with your tax credit lender, where you specify that you're not going to be paying them back, where you specify what discount is going to be applicable, what fees are going to be applicable, like the executive producer fee, a loan fee, a legal fee, and you're going to make sure that they will be paying you at a certain time. They are not part of the CAMA in most cases, and that's why this is not listed here. If you have co-production deals, in case you're doing a deal with a co-producer either in the US or outside of the US, will talk about the terms that are applicable to your project. You will talk about anything that they have to do in order to get paid a producer fee. Let's say, for example, it's a co-producer in another country. You would tell them, you're going to be my co-producer if you deliver to me this and this and this amount of local subsidies, and you get paid based on how much money you can actually get me. So you're very specific on what the deal is. With no matter who you're producing, you always define the scope, you always define the fees, you always define the back end, and you define any rights splits if applicable. You also define milestones, which says that you dictate to the producer, the co-producer, what you want from them and by when you want it. And if they don't deliver by then, the deal is null and void. As it relates to your bank deal, you are first getting your term sheet, which already tells you what your interest rate is, what your loan fee is, what the terms are, what the collateral is, how much money they will give you, how much discount they will apply, all these things. And you then will also have a long list of documents that they require in order to do what's called the bank closing. That is a huge list, way too long to list here, but once you're in the closing process, you will see it. You're going to need a lawyer to handle the bank closing for you, by the way, because it's just too much. Even for me, I wouldn't dare do this on my own. But the bank lawyer is going to be someone that the bank is going to work with you on, because it's basically one that you both decide who it is. So the thing that's important for you to agree with the bank is where their recoupment position is. Are they going to recoup after the collection agent? Are they going to be before? Are they going to let the sales agent recoup their fees or not? All these things you have to agree with them. The music investment deal is pretty straightforward. It's basically saying they pay for your music budget and they get all the residuals and nothing else. The crowdfunding deal is like a Kickstarter campaign where you agree, whatever the crowdfunder requires in order for them to help you raise the funds. And usually it's limited to a commission that they charge and the requirement of a back-end participation if there is one. For the sponsorship deal, you really have to do a deal with each and every brand, unless you do a deal with an agency that will handle the deal with each and every brand. But whatever it is, it's going to be very specific to the brand, and it's going to be very specific to the message and to the integration that's going to be serviced. For crowdfunding, you probably do the same thing. Each and every deal is going to be with each and every service provider. So whoever it is, you do basically a crew deal with them that says, I'm only going to pay you X or nothing, and here's what you get for that, which is potentially a profit participation. Your collection management agreement is basically something that the collection agent will do for you. You don't have to do this. All you do is give them the parties that you're working with and the deal terms that are applicable, and then they will put this agreement together for you and they will circulate it to all the parties, and then all the parties will give notes on that agreement. So that's an agreement that's done with everyone included. As we're getting to the end of our recap situation here, I wanted to give you some things, as I call them, thinking out of the box, because there's some additional, I don't want to say advice, it's the wrong word, but just some ideas for you that you can apply if they feel good to you, if they sound right. These are things that I have done myself, and as I mentioned before, in this industry there are no rules really. There is no book where you can look all these things up. There isn't really a university where you can study all these things and then you're ready to become a producer. So a lot of it is intuition, a lot of it is you being fast on your feet, and a lot of it is you just knowing what question to ask. And this is kind of going in that direction. What other things could you do in order to get to the goal of getting your movie made? So what I sometimes do when I put my projects together as it relates to actors, I research if an actor has a production company. And if they do, I sometimes go and I approach the production company and see if I can get the actor to co-produce the project with me. And I do that after I researched if this is a role that I feel that they would like to play. And that means they haven't played this before, they haven't shown this kind of range before, and they might just be interested to show off what else they can do in their talent. That's kind of where I was going with that. It is important, obviously, that you are looking into applying your idea that is a fresh and a new one. And you can actually go and look at other production companies that you feel can help your idea to fruition. And you would research them and see if there is a production company that you feel will be interested in something that you have because they have something similar. Or you feel that their lineup is similar, or their message is similar, or their branding is similar. So you can go to other production companies and do a deal with them to co-produce your production. When you do your bank deal, and let's say you have also investors, think about the fact that the bank is not going to really use all the collateral that they actually require, even though, for example, as I mentioned, they are requiring double the collateral for the money that they're giving you. So when your collateral is $2 million, your gap loan is only going to be $1 million. So sometimes, and what I've done is I'll talk to the bank and I say, you know what, you really don't really need these small little territories like Thailand, Middle East, South Korea, or airlines. You don't really need those. Let me take those out of your collateral and let me use them as a corridor, is what it's called. What does it do? It means that when I sell these territories, I become basically the bank in the sense that I'm in first position, and that money is mine. I don't have to give this to anyone. I don't have to use this for recoupment. I can use this money to make my life nicer, or I can actually offer my investor this corridor and saying, you are an equity investor, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a chocolate sundae on top of this ice cream. That is my movie, and I'm going to offer this direct corridor to you, a corridor where you recoup in first position. Equity investors will love this because it's very rarely offered to them, and I have to say I've done this with all my movies, and it worked wonders. It's not something a lot of producers do, just so you know. It's something that I do because I thought it's a good idea and turned out to work. When you put together your project and you're thinking about doing it in Europe, sometimes it makes sense to work with a European agent because they are potentially easier accessible as it relates to packaging. So the idea is to look for a European actor who has a strong value also in the US as well as in Europe, like a Christoph Waltz or a Emma Stone or someone like that, or Keira Knightley. So you can approach them when you're doing a co-production in England. You can approach them through the company in England and get a conversation going there, either directly or through your co-producer or through a local casting agent. This is going to be helpful to you when it comes to the packaging of it all. Another thing that I know sounds so sleazy, but I'm going to mention it anyway, is that a lot of investors, have maybe a girlfriend or a mistress or something, and they want to show off a little bit, or a daughter or a wife or whatever it might be, and say to you, I'm going to give you money, but I want my special someone to have a little role in your movie. This happens more often than not. And I've had this happen, I would say, at least on 50% of my movies. So it's a reality. And I really don't think there is anything wrong with it as long as they're like a total disaster and they really, harm your feature. If you give them a small role just to make them happy, it's a little bit work for the director. Obviously, you discuss this with the director. But, my directors were always open to this and actually did a very good job in getting really great performances out of these people. So it's worth just to think about. When it comes to production financing, there is a way to talk to small boutique investment firms about investing in your project, especially in a case where your production company is not just doing one project, but maybe you have put together a little slate. Because that means for the investment firm that you are now diversifying the risk for the investment, not just putting the money in one, but maybe in 3 projects or 5 projects. So that's worth having a conversation with a small investment firm that is open for what is called alternative investments. I would also think about the situation where you may be talking to already distributors or local streaming services you have a relationship with, or you research online someone who knows someone. Any access you can get to a distributor where you can pre-sale, especially in the US, would be a very, very good thing. But make sure that if and when you approach people like this, that you're really ready. You have your package in place, you have a perfect business expose, everything looks fantastic. You might even produce a little sizzle reel or a mood trailer, something like that. Or you could have done a little Kickstarter campaign to create a buzz around your project or the subject matter. Anything you do to create awareness in a professional way and in a way that shows off the quality and the uniqueness of your project is useful. So I hope these little ideas spark some inspiration with you, and you can also feel free to just ignore them.